The Storyteller's Shield. You hear stories on the road. Stories are what keep me going, keep me alive. Sometimes it's something practical, like where to find supplies or shelter. Sometimes the stories are personal, and tell me a lot about who people are. These are the stories that keep my feet on the road, keep me from sitting down and not getting back up again. Food and shelter are important, but in these desperate times you also need to scavenge reasons to keep going. The other kind of story you get, albeit rarely, is about the burning. There aren't many left alive now who were around when it happened, and fewer still who saw it with their own eyes. It's becoming a legend in its own right, and as someone who has been collecting these tales since he was old enough to understand them, I've been able to see it take on new life as it passes from a handful of first-hand accounts into second-hand tales and third-hand rumours. Watching how the story changes with the telling is as interesting to me as the truth of it, if such truth truly exists anymore. What is certainly true is what you can see. The world is a blackened shell, inhabited by the children of those few who survived whatever made it thus. Even the cause of the burning is told differently by some than others. A lot of the stories I hear tell about a great army that descended on the land and laid it to waste utterly. They cite the killing fields as their evidence, pointing to the huge amount of weapons and armour that could be found there in the early days, long since picked clean now, of course. Others claim, rather more fantastically, that the war itself caused a mysterious sickness that burned as it infected, levelling cities and forests alike. They ask why an army would burn forests, or indeed an entire kingdom. My favourite stories, the ones that as a scared child would excite me most, were the ones about dragons. My father told me that even before the burning there had been tales of dragons, ancient myths that he said told more about how people think than how the world was. Now there were new stories, ones that spoke of how the winged beasts had returned and reduced the world to ash in a single day. I always heard these stories through the lens of my father's scepticism, seeing the dragons as a metaphor for the war or sickness or whatever it was that had burned the world. One day, I thought I had it solved. I was following a story I had heard about a place with unusually well-preserved relics, a swamp several days' travel to the north. It was guaranteed to be dangerous, with bandits and predatory animals between me and my destination, and then of course the hazards of the swamp itself. The mud-stained scavenger who told me about it warned me against the journey, having lost 2 companions to their own attempts. But the nights were getting longer, and if I could find enough to barter, it would make surviving the winter that much easier. It seemed the swamp was the site of a battle, another of the legendary killing fields lost to the changing landscape. Items looted from these areas years ago were still used as currency, weapons, shields and armour being necessary defence against the hostile world. Even items like bones, tents and saddlebags were valued for repurposing. Nobody knew now the secrets that allowed our forebears to shape metal as skillfully as before, and raw materials were hard to come by. I was cautious at the swamp, probing the ground with flame-hardened sticks as my father had taught me. It took a long time searching in this manner, but I did find several items worth taking, including a shield that, when I scraped the muck from its face, stole the breath from my chest. Shields were usually made of wood and leather, and most showed signs of having been painted, though it was never more than a fleck of paint here and there that remained. This shield was different. It was metal for a start, and at first I mistook it for a chest plate, especially given the fact that it was shaped differently to the round wooden shields that could be found at these old sites. Then I found the arm rings and the unmistakable shape of a dragon, painted in bold colours on its face. I had never seen such colours before, but I will struggle to describe them. The dragon itself was the deep, angry colour of the heart of a fire. The background like a ripe field of grain caught in the evening sun. As I gazed at this wonder, something fell into place across all the tales I had collected over my years of travelling this blasted landscape, and like the water running over the mud of the shield's design, began to reveal something to me I had never considered possible. What if the tales of dragons burning the land were both true and fantasy at the same time? What if the army were the dragons, marching across the world with beasts of flame adorning their shields, bringing death and fire wherever they went. My father spoke of tales that told the truth through lies, and used what he called poetic language to tell stories in a way that somehow spoke more than truth. Could it be that I had found just such an answer to the question of how the world was burned? I thought on this as I made the journey south. A tale like this, deftly told, could see me fed through the long winter if I could get to one of the larger settlements. There was a village a few days' walk away. I could test my story on an audience there. The walk was relatively uneventful, apart from a few hours spent in a hollow beneath a scorched boulder due to a group of bandits passing by with blood-stained swords in their hands. The light was already fading by the time they walked close enough to my hiding spot for me to see, but I thought I saw blood staining their mouths as well. Thankfully, they did not see me. I thought a lot about the dragons on my way to the village, and how I was going to weave the threads of the two sets of tales together. There was a lot of material on both sides, and surprisingly enough, almost none of it was contradictory when you put it all together with the knowledge that the dragons and the army were one and the same thing. There was a cool breeze at my back, and the sun was setting red before me as I crested the final hill to look down on the village. It had never been much to look at, cobbled together as it was from burned-out buildings and what little could be made by those with no skill in doing so. There were crude barricades that helped defend what little the inhabitants had from those who would take it. It was burning. Smoke rose in black clouds from the shacks, and flames licked at everything that would ignite. My thoughts initially went to the group of bandits that had passed me. They could well have been the perpetrators of this massacre. Then I thought of the poor villagers, and their modest but tenacious existence annihilated like an insect beneath a boot heel. My next thought was of myself, and how far I would have to travel to reach the next available shelter, and how I might survive until I did. My storyteller's mind then took over, and reflected on the tales of dragons and the burning. After this, the logical survivor's voice in my head told me that the bandits passed me a full day ago, and that there was not enough in this tiny village to keep a fire burning that long. A sound broke through my reverie and chilled my blood. It was like no sound I had heard before, but spoke to something primitive in my head that responded with a simple command. Run. It was a sound of terror that seemed to fill the air despite sounding distant. Somehow, despite how utterly illogical it was, I knew what was coming. Run! My feet stayed rooted, my need to see overruling my need to escape. Shapes appeared above the horizon, flying shapes like the birds of stories from before the burning. But these were not birds. These were myths. These were the deep, angry heart of a fire. Run!